All right. Me is all right. We are recording and good to go. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to be here today. My name is Michael Prosnitz. I'm the program coordinator for the Office of Strategy, Science, and Technology with New Mexico Economic Development Department. I see a lot of familiar faces here, so that's great to see. But today we're going to be going over a brief overview of the fiscal year 26 SBIR and STTR matching grant. I've probably got about a 10-15 minute presentation, and then usually we hold questions for after the presentation. Feel free to type them in the chat or to raise your hand, and we'll get to them after the presentation. I do want to acknowledge also for this particular grant, I'll save a little bit of time after the presentation to discuss some of the current delays in the federal government due to the new administration, and how that's affected SBIR and STTR grants, and a little bit related to this grant as well. So before I go ahead and get started, can I just confirm everyone can hear me and see the slides?
Yep. Absolutely.
Great. All right, awesome. Up to that. All right, well then let's go ahead and get into it. So the goal of this grant is to assist early stage technology companies with commercializing their technologies and continuing to do business in New Mexico, specifically for technology companies that have an active SBIR or STTR grant. The funds are to be used for business development expenses. If you're familiar with some of our other grants, like our Science and Technology Business Startup Grant, it's very similar to that grant, but we'll go over that in detail a little bit later on in the slides. And then this grant, different from some of our other grants, is open to any industry sector. So any company in New Mexico with an active SBIR or STTR grant is eligible to apply for this matching grant through the state. That being said, our office does have 5 prioritized sectors that we focus on for this grant, those being aerospace, biosciences, advanced computing, water technologies, and advanced energy. Let's go into the eligibility first. So first, you need to be headquartered in New Mexico with 60% of your payroll in New Mexico, meaning that you can be, incorporated in Delaware, whatever that looks like for your company, but you need to be headquartered in New Mexico with 60% of your payroll physically located in the state of New Mexico. You need to be in good standing with the state of New Mexico, meaning if you've had previous funding from us or any other incentives through the state of New Mexico, through other departments, that you've essentially executed those grants well and on time, and are in good standing. You must have an active federal SBIR or STTR Phase 1 or Phase 2 at the time of submitting an application, or be within 3 months of a Phase 1 having ended with intentions to apply for a Phase 2. And again, we'll go over details on this a little bit more at the end of the presentation with recent federal delays. Again, all for-profit companies in New Mexico are eligible to apply with those 5 sectors that are prioritized, as I mentioned on the previous slide. And then lastly, you must certify in the application that at least 51% of activities conducted under the SBIR or STTR and 31% of the state funds will be used in the state of New Mexico. So essentially over 50% needs to be, for the SBIR STTR, needs to be spent in New Mexico, and over 30%, and over 30% of the state funds need to be used in New Mexico. All right, and then similar to the previous year, the awards are $50,000 up to $50,000 for a Phase 1 and up to $100,000 for a Phase 2 award. In previous years, or last year in fiscal year 25, we gave out 8 awards, and in fiscal year 26, fiscal year 24, in the previous year to that, we gave out 7 awards. So now for the funding uses, I like to go over this first by talking about the ineligible funding uses because those are kind of the hard stops. And then what's listed in the eligible funding use are just kind of what we most commonly see people spend the funds on. So for ineligible funding uses, that includes essentially anything that is covered by your SBIR or STTR grant. So you cannot spend the state match on payroll expenses, research and development internal to the company, materials or supplies over $100, alcohol, drugs, or food, and then laboratory or business equipment. I think maybe for the alcohol, drugs, and food, I'm not sure if that's covered in SBIR and STTR, but all the other four are. So this is kind of to offset other costs that might be incurred by the company during their SBIR STTR funding period. So things we see people most commonly spend the funding on are things like intellectual property assessment, patent filing, outside lab testing and validation, regulatory assessment and certifications, meeting with customers, partners, and investors, and then also things like attending trade shows, which no more than 10% of the awarded funds can be put towards. And then lastly, something like market research or data acquisition. This is not an all-inclusive list, so it's pretty much as long as you see things that aren't in the ineligible funding use and you'd like to use the funds on that, that is more than likely okay. If you have anything that's maybe a bit of a gray area that you have questions on, you're always welcome to send me an email to ask, and we can get that worked out for you. All right, so the application itself is broken up into 5 sections. The first is company information, pretty straightforward, just basic information on your company, number of employees, what you're incorporated as, those sorts of questions. Then company eligibility, asking you some of those eligibility criteria I went over before, just to make sure you are eligible in your application. Then there's a section to put information on your SBIR and STTR award, things like your abstract, title, the dates of the award, etc. Then comes the actual proposal, which is where you're going to do most of the actual writing for the application. There are, I think, 8 or 9 questions on things like, what's the problem, what's the solution, what's the market like, the team, things like that, kind of pretty basic to what you would see in any kind of application or pitch deck. They do have a 1,250 character limit, which translates to roughly about a 250 word limit or 2 pages double spaced of writing. There is one question that has a 350 word limit because there's kind of a little bit more to say on that question. But keep in mind that even though on the application for kind of, it's easier to think in terms of word count instead of character count, it'll say like a 250 word limit or a 350 word limit, but technically it's actually 1,250 characters or 1,750 characters. So if you're coming up to a block there, just keep that in mind. And then lastly, there's a certification, just a couple things to check, saying all the information you've included is true, you're eligible for the application, and then write your name as a signature. Throughout that application, there's going to be 3 documents. It's in the waiting room. Okay. There's going to be 3 documents you need to upload. The first is a letter of good standing with the state of New Mexico. There are instructions on how to find this letter in the grant manual for the grant on our website. It is, I believe, at the bottom of page 3. Essentially, you go into your taxation and revenue portal with the state of New Mexico, go through a couple tabs, and then there's an option to submit a request for a letter of good standing. Usually that comes in virtually on your platform within less than 5 minutes. If you do run into any issues there, please feel free to get in contact with me and we can try to work that out. The second is the notice of award. So again, we'll go into this a little bit later, but you'll upload a notice of award for your SBIR or STTR. And then the proposal upload, which is essentially like uploading your budget, tasks, milestones, costs, timeline, those sorts of things into the application. So we don't have any kind of guidelines for how to format this, but we're essentially looking for a budget of how you're going to spend the funds and on what, when it's going to be spent, and and the expected completion, of any of those tasks. Nothing too in depth. The more in depth you can make it, the better. But you don't have to go heinously in depth at this stage of the grant. If you are awarded funds in the later, or if you are awarded, an award later down the line, then we'll go into a little bit more detail on some specifics for that proposal upload. And keep in mind that the timeline, everything budget item wise needs to be completed between July of 2025 and June of 2026. So about 12 months. All right. As far as the evaluation goes, all applications are going to be evaluated by our Technology Research Collaborative Board, our TRC board. And these are the kind of things that they're going to look at when they're evaluating your application. So they're going to look at things like in your basic proposal, the problem statement, your unique value proposition, the technology itself and its fit in the market, the commercialization potential of that technology, any potential risks that are in that market or in that competitive landscape, the financial forecast you provide for the company, your proposed use of funds in that upload I mentioned in the previous slide, team and the team's expertise, their ability to take that commercial or that product to commercialization. And then most importantly, is developing their potential to develop the tax base and create jobs in New Mexico. So there is, these are state fund, or these are taxpayer dollars that are being appropriated through state funds to your business. And really we're looking to get kind of a return essentially on that investment in the form of developing the tax base in New Mexico, which leads to, job creation. And specifically with science and tech companies, those tend to be high paying jobs. So those are very sought after. There is going to be a question on the application, similar to something we had last year, but a little bit more built out on kind of your plan, either 3 or 5-year plan on building out the company in New Mexico and what that might look like for helping develop that tax base or creating jobs potentially in the future. So keep that question in mind. All right. And then if you are awarded a grant, couple things that kind of want to go into what that'll look like. So the first thing is that you'll need to sign a grant agreement with the state of New Mexico, just essentially finalizing the funds and all the requirements of on the state side of things and on the grantee side of things. You'll submit a state of New Mexico W-9, which will get you set up as a vendor within the state of New Mexico so that we can actually appropriate the funds to you. There's a halfway report and a final report you'll fill out through the grant period, kind of at the 6-month and 12-month points. And then there's a couple follow-on funding updates we'll ask for in a year or two leading up after that funding period. You will receive payment on a cost reimbursement basis. So what this will look like is we will give the money out essentially in 4 tranches. So even though it's cost reimbursement, we give 25% of the funds up front. So let's say, for example, you're awarded $100,000 with a phase 2. You'll receive 25,000 of those dollars upfront at the start of the grant. And then in order to move to the second tranche of 25,000 and the next and the next, you'll provide a itemized expense report and matching receipts for that itemized expense report for how the first tranche of money was spent. And then you can invoice for the second tranche, and then same for the second to the third and the third to the fourth. And then we'll have that halfway report and that final report after the second and fourth tranche of funding, respectively. And then lastly, due to some changes at the state level earlier this year, it's kind of a statewide initiative. The state of New Mexico will be issuing a 1099 tax form to all awardees of state grants within our office, outside of our office, kind of any state grants that are awarded. And that includes this SBIR and STTR matching grant. I am not a tax professional, and as an employee of the state of New Mexico, I cannot give tax advice on how to account for this tax form within your company. So we advise you to talk to a tax professional if you have any questions on that 1099 tax form and what that might look like within your company. All right, let's go over the timeline real quick. So applications opened a week ago on May 20th, 2025. They're open for about 3 weeks from that date. 2 weeks from today, up until June 10th. It will close at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. That is a hard stop. So, if you're working on your application and it's 5:01, even if you have it open, it's not going to let you submit it. So please make sure you get it in ahead of time, a day or 2 or 3 in advance if you can, but definitely, at least a couple hours in advance just to make sure there's any kind of technical difficulties. There's no leeway there. It'll close at 5 p.m. is a hard stop. Once we have all the applications in and the application is closed, all the eligible applications will be reviewed by our Technology Research Collaborative Board. This year, we're doing things a little differently than we did in the previous year, going back to a format we had a couple of years ago for our grants. And we're going to be doing virtual presentations on July 10th for this grant. So the Technology Research Collaborative Board will select a certain amount of finalists from the applications, and those finalists will be invited to present, likely about a little more than I think a week. We'll give about a week notice of if you're a finalist or not to present for this July 10th virtual presentation. And then based on those virtual presentations, we'll pick a certain number of those finalists to actually award the awards to. So essentially just kind of a bit of a extra bit of a pitch competition almost for this award cycle. Give you a chance to kind of explain yourself in front of the TRC board and go back and forth with questions to really build out your application and your presentation. And then pretty quickly after that, we'll make the award decisions mid-July, likely within a week or less of those presentations, and then move forward from there. And then lastly, all the awarded projects must be completed by June 30th of 2026. That is when the state's fiscal year ends, so that is when all the money needs to be invoiced for and expensed. All right, so I do want to take a second now to kind of go over a little bit of, I've had some concerns recently brought up about delays with federal SBIRs and STTRs at the federal level with the new administration. So I want to kind of talk about what that's going to look like related to this grant. So we understand, that there are some delays for some companies that do not yet have a notice of award and only maybe have either an intent to fund or are currently kind of in a waiting period of even getting an intent to fund, when typically they would have received a notice of award if they were awarded at this point. Unfortunately, we can't be that flexible on this requirement of having an NOA to be eligible for this grant. Just like in previous years, there needs to be, some sort of official documentation that an SBIR or an STTR has been awarded. And due to the state fiscal year, we need to run this grant during this period of time in order to give the grantees enough time to spend all the funds in a reasonable period and meet all their milestones by June 30th of 2026. So with the delays, that essentially might mean that it pushes you to being eligible to our next round of funding. We're not too sure when that is right now at this point, but there will be another round for this grant. So, make sure you stay in touch and communicate that with me so we can kind of get an idea of when that might be a good time to run the grant again or anything like that. And then I've also had some questions and concerns regarding uncertainty with phase 2 awards. So if you have a phase 1 or phase 2 active, this does not concern those grants. This is only for that bit of language I mentioned earlier where it says if you are within 3 months of a phase 1 having ended with intentions of applying for a phase 2. In order to meet that criteria, there does need to be either a solicitation from the agency for that phase 2 or some communication from the agency that they plan to release that solicitation. So if there isn't any kind of solicitation or any active effort from the agency to release a solicitation for a phase 2 award, then you won't be eligible through that specific language of 3 months after phase 1 having ended with intentions of applying for a phase 2, just for that specific scenario. Now, again, I understand this is not a great fit for some of those companies that are kind of in that waiting period. Unfortunately, we cannot be too flexible there, but I do want to hear any, concerns or feedback or criticism that people do have on that. Given that we're looking at, 4 years of the current administration and not knowing what that might look like with kind of SBIRs and STTRs and kind of a lot of federal funding. Your feedback is important to make sure that in future iterations of this grant, it can be run, maybe more effectively down the line, so we can continue to, further support businesses that have this SBIR and STTR funding. So again, if you have any questions or concerns or anything on that, please feel free to either email me or we can bring them up and discuss that today. But that's kind of it for the presentation at this point. My email and phone number are on the screen, and we can move into the questions portion for anyone has questions. Let's see, let me bring this up here. See, it doesn't look like I have anything in the chat yet, so we can go to Amy.
Oh, thank you. So I've got a question. We've got a phase 1 fast track, and we've applied for phase 2B. The initial solicitation that we applied to, that program is closed, and our program officer recommended that we apply through the NIH Omnibus.
Okay.
Does that preclude us from this, or is that acceptable?
So let me just make sure I have this straight. Sure. You had a phase 1 through a different agency, or was it also through the NIH?
It's all through NIH, but the actual funding mechanism is gone. But they requested that we submit through the omnibus bill.
Okay, and is that phase 1 currently active, or did it end?
It is currently still active until July, and we've already applied for the phase 2B.
Gotcha. Okay, so in that case, since you do currently have an active phase 1 SBIR, even though the phase 2 funding is canceled, you are eligible to apply through a phase 1 submission for this grant.
Okay, great.
Like I said, it gets a little bit different if it's kind of the phase 1 has ended and you're within that 3-month period. And if your funding was canceled, then that might be a different story. But since you currently have an active phase 1, you can apply under that current phase 1.
Perfect. Thank you.
Of course. And then I see we have Dave.
Yeah. Hey, Michael. Thank you for doing this and fielding these questions in this weird time. So I think we've communicated previously. We were approved for a phase 2. We completed our CAP review 6 weeks ago, and so I certainly expected a notice of award by now. It still hasn't come, and our program manager is not terribly responsive, given additional responsibility pushed in his lap. So the question is, the phase 2, it's a 2-year award. So our for the federal, it's an STTR with UNM, and it goes for 2 years from the date of award. Assuming we're not going to get the notice of award in the next 10 days, are we able to apply for this again next year? Because our phase 2 will be active during that period. I assume yes, but just wanted to confirm.
Yes, you will.
Okay.
So as long as you have an active grant, you can apply once for a phase 1 grant, and then you can apply again for a phase 2 grant. As long as they're active, there's no issues there.
Okay, thank you.
If, again, I know, Dave, in your case, you've applied for one of our grants before. The application is pretty similar. If you want to just toss in an application in the hope that maybe you hear back, that's an option, but obviously that's quite a bit of work. So for not a guarantee. So I just want to throw it out there that if, you want to throw in an application and then before any decisions are made, you get that notice of award, you can throw it over to me, and then maybe there's, maybe it fits within a time frame, maybe not. Just something to consider.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And then Gil.
Hello, Michael. Just a quick comment and then a question. The comment is that I believe anything you guys can do to add flexibility on SBIR dates is helpful. So perhaps in the future it could be, if we have unofficial notice, then we can apply, but we can't be awarded unless the notice comes. Some sort of accommodation like that would make sense. My question is regarding the allowance for off-site testing. Can you just say another word about that? I mean, what's sort of typical past things that are budgeted on there?
So it, really depends. Essentially, as long as it is contracted out external to the company, meaning you are not doing it, if you're the CEO, you're not doing it yourself, you're not paying yourself for that work, but it's instead contracted out for someone else to do that testing, it's eligible. Now, as far as kind of what we typically see, varies quite a bit. It can be, testing software in various situations through a contractor. It can be, the testing of a prototype. It can be,
Okay,
what else do we
great.
see?
That covers, that's exactly what I was
those are
looking
kind of
for.
the main two
Perfect.
ones we see. But
Yep.
yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm. Then I see Luis.
Hello. Yeah, it's just a simple question. I kind of got the hint that we needed to have a federal SBIR grant in order to apply for this. Is that correct, or did I misunderstand?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Now that being said, if you do not have one, we do have funding that's going to be opening up later this year on August 12th, our Science and Technology Business Startup Grant. You do not need to have an active SBIR or STTR for that one. There's no kind of, anything you have to meet for that grant, except being headquartered in New Mexico with 60% of your payroll in New Mexico. So if you are interested in learning more about that, feel free to send me an email and I can send you some information on that grant. Similar to this grant, it awards $25,000 to $50,000 for the same kind of business development expenses.
Okay, thank you.
I think I got to all the hands. Let's check the Q&A real quick. So clarifying the state funds being used in New Mexico. If you were to spend 100% of the awarded funds on a patent attorney headquartered outside of the state, then that would not meet that criteria. It would have to be at most, like 65%, 69% of those funds being used on the patent attorney outside of the state, and then 31% of the funds would need to be spent within the state of New Mexico. I don't see any other questions at this time, but again, I do just want to reiterate if there are questions, concerns, comments, feedback on how we can be more flexible potentially in the future for iterations of this grant. Assuming that the federal uncertainty right now is probably going to continue for a little bit, I'm very open to hearing that and would love to hear that so that we can try to be more flexible and adjust in the future. For this grant, just timing wise, we didn't really have the ability to run that flexibility and get everything approved and et cetera in the amount of time, but definitely something we're considering in the future. So please feel free to reach out with any of those comments or concerns. And then I'll stick around for a little bit, but I guess that's kind of the end of the webinar. If there's no more questions, so if there's anything else you want to ask, feel free to stick around and ask. But otherwise, I hope everyone had a good long weekend, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their week. Thank you for joining.
Thanks again, Michael. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Sharon. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Hey, Michael, this is Patrick with the JTIP program. How are you?
I'm doing well, Patrick. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I was just joining just to kind of get an overview of your spiel. So thanks. I don't have anything to add.
Of course, if you have any questions or any companies interested, feel free to send them my way.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have a great week. Thanks so much.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye. All right, Sharon, it looks like it is just us, so I'm going to go ahead and close out the event. Any last minute questions or anything?
Can't think of anything. Is this the final seminar? You're not going to continue this? Is this continuous or just what you went over this afternoon?
Just for this specific grant, yes, but for
Okay.
every grant we run, there will be a webinar like this 1 week after the application opens.
Okay, please keep me posted.
Will do.
Thank you. I have to have a grant in place before I can do this, correct?
For this specific one, yes. Not for
Okay.
the Science and Technology Business Startup Grant that'll open on August 12th.
All
And
right,
you'll-
I'll be meeting with John Hernandez on Friday. I'll keep you posted
Oh,
to see
right.
if
Yes,
maybe
I do
we can
remember
join together and submit grant application.
that. Right.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to hearing about it. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.